She was born into the most powerful family in Russia, and she was a grand duchess. On the day of her birth, her father, the last Tsar of Russia, wrote in his diary, "The second bright and joyful day for our family." At 10:40 in the morning, the Lord blessed us with a daughter, Tatiana. Poor Alex suffered through the entire night without closing her eyes once, and at 8 she went to her mother's room. Thank God for this moment. Everything happened quickly and safely, and I don't feel nervously exhausted. Our eldest daughter is very happy with her. Among her sisters, Tatiana was the most serious and the most well-known, often representing the family on official occasions. Highly responsible, she was also the one who shared the closest bond with her mother, Empress Alexandra. In today's video, Tatiana Nikolaevna Romanov, known as the governess. But before we begin, if you're already subscribed, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. And if you're new here and passionate about the stories of the old monarchs, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Tatiana was born on June 10th, 1897, the second daughter of Emperor Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. She weighed nearly 4 kilograms at birth, and the doctor had to use forceps during delivery. When Alexandra regained consciousness from the chloroform, she saw the anxious faces gathered around her and burst into tears. "My God, another girl! What will the nation say? What will the nation say?" she cried. Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich wrote that everyone was deeply disappointed. They had all hoped for a son. And Grand Duke George Alexandrovich, Nicholas's younger brother, remarked half-jokingly, "Well, I was getting ready to retire, but it seems I won't have to just yet." According to the law of succession, the imperial throne of Russia could not pass to a woman unless all legitimate male lines were extinct. And so, after Tatiana's birth, Nicholas's heir remained his brother, George. Like all Romanov children, Tatiana was raised with strict austerity. She and her sisters slept on camp beds without pillows, took cold baths every morning, and spent hours embroidering and knitting gifts to be sold or donated at charity bazaars. Their mother firmly believed in a Spartan education for her daughters. Tatiana and her sister Olga were inseparable from childhood. In the spring of 1901, Olga fell ill with typhoid fever and was confined to the infirmary for several weeks. When she finally began to recover, Tatiana was allowed to visit her for 5 minutes, but she didn't recognize her. When the governess told her that the pale, frail girl lying there was indeed Olga, Tatiana, barely 4 years old, broke into tears and refused to believe it. She insisted that this thin, sickly child could not be her sister. The governess had to comfort her and reassure her that Olga would get well. One of her mother's closest friends, Anna Virubova, would later recall, Tatiana was the perfect reflection of her mother. Taller and more slender than her sisters, she had the gentleness and grace of her English ancestors. She was kind, serene, and deeply affectionate. Toward her younger sisters and her brother, she showed a naturally protective spirit, so much so that playfully they began to call her the governess. Of all the Grand Duchesses, Tatiana was the one most beloved by those who knew her, and I suspect, in her parents' hearts, she was the one most tenderly cherished. Tatiana was sociable, fond of company, and deeply loyal in friendship. Yet for those young, noble, and sheltered girls, finding true friends was no easy task. The Tsarina feared that her daughters might be influenced by the spoiled girls of the aristocracy, young women whose minds, from an early age, were filled with frivolities, and often with the vices of a society in decline. For that reason, she discouraged any closeness with cousins or relatives, many of whom were already far too precocious in both ideas and behavior. Tatiana and Olga were known within the family as the big pair, while their 2 younger sisters formed the little pair. The 4 sisters often sent gifts and signed their letters with that shared nickname. They did everything together, sharing every small treasure and secret among themselves and with their few trusted friends. Sophie Buxhoevden, one of the Tsarina's ladies-in-waiting, would later recall, Once, they decided my gown needed a ruby necklace to complete it. I told them I didn't have one, that my pearls were quite enough. Tatiana left the room and soon returned with several brooches, insisting I wear them. Naturally, I refused, much to her surprise. Then she said, "We sisters always lend each other our jewelry. We always find the perfect piece for every dress." As Tatiana grew older, she became a young woman of striking beauty. She had reddish-brown hair, blue eyes, and delicate, refined features. Many considered her the most beautiful of the four Grand Duchesses. In 1900, the British magazine Women at Home wrote, "Of them all, the flower of the flock in beauty is the Grand Duchess Tatiana." She also maintained a wonderful relationship with her siblings, especially with little Alexei Romanov, who suffered from hemophilia and spent much of his life ill. Tatiana cared for him with profound tenderness, almost like a second mother. She loved fashion and was fascinated by new trends. She read magazines, adored perfumes and dresses, and it was said that no matter how old or simple a garment was, it always looked elegant on her. She had a natural gift for style, was admired by everyone, and truthfully, she enjoyed being admired. Tatiana also had remarkable skill in embroidery and crochet, and she was an excellent hairdresser. She styled her own hair, her sisters, and even her mother's, with the precision and talent of a professional. In character, Tatiana was a natural leader, practical, disciplined, and organized. Her siblings, who called her the governess, often sent her to speak with their parents whenever they wanted to ask for a favor. Although Olga was the eldest, she never questioned Tatiana's authority. She accepted, with quiet grace, that her sister would take the lead. In 1905, Pierre Gilliard was hired as tutor to the Tsar's children, beginning with the two eldest, Olga and Tatiana. He wrote that Tatiana was reserved and balanced, less open and spontaneous than Olga, but extraordinarily diligent and hardworking. Colonel Eugeny Kobylinsky, who guarded the family first at Tsarskoye Selo and later in Tobolsk, once said that Tatiana showed little interest in art, and that perhaps she might have been happier had she been born a man. Even so, Tatiana was the most social of the four sisters, though she had very few friends, and no girl her age was ever invited to the palace. She longed for companions her own age, but her high rank, combined with her mother's disdain for society, kept her world painfully small. She was also the most well-known of the sisters, admired for her lively spirit and her deep sense of duty. And much like her mother, Tatiana was profoundly religious. Among all the sisters, she was the one closest to her. Many believed she was Empress Alexandra's favorite child. Her French tutor once wrote that it wasn't that the others loved their mother any less. It was simply that Tatiana understood her best, always surrounding her with tireless care and devotion. It was said that the Tsar adored Tatiana with the same deep affection, and that the two shared much in common. Queen Victoria had passed down the gene for hemophilia to her daughter Alice, who in turn transmitted it to her own daughter, Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. We all know that the Tsarevich Alexei suffered terribly from the effects of hemophilia throughout his short life. But what is rarely mentioned is that Tatiana and her three sisters were also potential carriers of that same genetic curse. Her paternal aunt, Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna of Russia, recalled that Maria, Tatiana's younger sister, suffered severe bleeding during a tonsil operation in December of 1914. The surgeon was so alarmed that the Tsarina herself had to urge him to continue the procedure. Olga Alexandrovna also stated that all four of her nieces bled more than normal, and that they were indeed carriers of the hemophilia gene. Symptomatic carriers do not suffer from the disease itself, but they can show related signs, such as abnormally low clotting levels that cause prolonged or excessive bleeding. In 1911, a terrible event left a lasting mark on Tatiana and Olga. Both witnessed the assassination of Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin during a performance at the Kiev Opera House. That same September, Tsar Nicholas II wrote to his mother, the Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna, saying the tragedy had deeply shaken the girls. Tatiana wept inconsolably, and both sisters struggled to sleep that night. During her teenage years, Tatiana received the honorary title of colonel and was appointed to command a regiment of soldiers. She and Olga often carried out inspections, and though Tatiana enjoyed the company of the officers, she was frequently shocked by their behavior. On one occasion, a group of officers aboard the imperial yacht handed Olga a newspaper clipping, a photograph of Michelangelo's David, completely nude. Outraged, Tatiana, who was only 14 at the time, wrote to her aunt, Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna, describing the incident and adding that instead of being offended, her sister Olga had burst out laughing. Amid laughter and embarrassment, none of the officers dared admit who was responsible. Sometime later, Tatiana fell ill and was confined to bed, yet she begged her mother to let her go out, to see a soldier she had fallen in love with. In a letter, she wrote, "I would so love to attend the review of the 2nd Division, since I'm the second daughter and Olga was the first. So now it's my turn. Yes, Mama, and in the 2nd Division, I'll see the one I need to see. You know who he is." It is said that King Peter I of Serbia desired Tatiana as a bride for his younger son, Prince Alexander. In January of 1914, the Serbian Prime Minister personally delivered a letter to Tsar Nicholas, in which the king expressed his wish for his son to marry one of the Grand Duchesses. Nicholas had already noticed that the young prince's eyes often lingered on Tatiana during family banquets held in St. Petersburg during his recent visits. It was also rumored that the House of Windsor had considered the possibility of uniting her in marriage with the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VIII, who admitted to being captivated by her beauty and by the gentle tenderness with which she cared for her younger brother. At that time, her parents had begun to consider potential suitors from the royal courts of Europe. But every conversation ended before it could truly begin, because the outbreak of the First World War would change the fate of the Romanovs forever. When the Great War erupted, Tatiana became a nurse for the Red Cross, alongside her mother and her sister Olga. Many observed that Tatiana was almost as skilled and dedicated as the Empress herself, and that her only complaint was being kept away from the most difficult cases because of her youth. In September of 1914, she was named patron of a wartime relief organization known as the Tatiana Committee. Tatiana was deeply patriotic. On October 29, 1914, in the midst of the war, she apologized to her mother for having spoken harshly about the Germans in her presence, explaining that she thought of her only as Russian and had forgotten that the Tsarina had been born in Germany. Empress Alexandra replied that the rumors spread among the Russian people about her German roots caused her great pain, for she considered herself completely Russian. Dmitry Yakovlevich Malama, an officer of the Imperial Russian Cavalry, met Tatiana after being wounded in 1914, and it seems that a quiet affection grew between them. That same year, he gifted her a French bulldog, which she named Ortypo. In a letter to her mother, Tatiana wrote, "Forgive me for the little dog." To tell the truth, when he asked if I'd like to have it, if he gave it to me, I said yes at once. Do you remember how I've always wanted one? Only later, when we came home, I thought that perhaps you might not approve, but I was so happy with the idea that I forgot everything else. Yet within the heart of the imperial family stood an enigmatic figure. Empress Alexandra placed immense trust in the counsel of Grigory Rasputin, a wandering Russian peasant regarded by many as a holy man. She believed that his prayers could save the ailing Tsarevich. Tatiana and her siblings also saw Rasputin as a dear friend and confided in him completely. In one letter, the 11-year-old Tatiana asked Rasputin to visit her, expressing how hard it was to see her mother so ill, though she added that he already knew, because he always knew everything, but not everyone shared their faith in him. Sofia Ivanovna, one of the princess's governesses, was horrified to discover that Rasputin had access to the girls' bedrooms while they were still in their nightgowns, and demanded that he be forbidden from entering. She later told Grand Duchess Tsarina that Rasputin would sometimes visit Olga and Tatiana even before she herself entered their room in the morning. He spoke with them and even caressed them. The sisters hid Rasputin's presence from their governess and were afraid to mention his name in front of her. Tatiana sensed the tension and feared how her mother might react to Sofia's accusations. On March 8, 1910, 12-year-old Tatiana wrote to her mother, "I'm so afraid that Sofia will say something bad about our friend. I hope our governess is kind to him now." Alexandra dismissed Sofia Ivanovna immediately. Most accounts agree that Rasputin's relationship with the children was innocent. He wasn't mad. He knew exactly how far he could go. Even so, Tsar Nicholas asked him not to enter the children's quarters again. Grand Duchess Tsarina was horrified when she heard Sofia Ivanovna's story. On March 15th, 1910, she wrote in her diary that she could not understand how her brother and his family could consider Rasputin, whom she saw as nothing more than a filthy peasant, almost a saint. Maria Vishniakova, another governess of the royal children, at first held a good opinion of Rasputin, but she too became disillusioned. In the spring of 1910, she claimed that Rasputin had violated her. The empress refused to believe it. To Alexandra, such a thing was impossible. Rasputin was a holy man. And just as she had done before, the empress dismissed Maria Vishniakova. But rumors began to spread, malicious whispers claiming Rasputin had seduced the empress and the 4 grand duchesses. He himself had shown the letters they had written to him. Though they were completely innocent, filled with gratitude and affection, they fueled endless gossip about supposed scandals. There is even a theory, one that many believe to be no more than a Russian legend, that Tatiana herself was present at Rasputin's assassination, disguised as a lieutenant, seeking revenge for an attempted assault. But the only truth is that the 4 grand duchesses were deeply shaken when they learned of his death. They were together, huddled on a sofa, when the news reached them. And somehow, it was as if they could already feel the political storm about to break loose. Rasputin was buried with an icon signed on the back by Tatiana, her mother, and her siblings. But these were times of war, and the country was sinking into despair. The sisters continued their work as nurses for the Red Cross, and as Tatiana grew older, she took on more and more public duties, leading committees, managing charities, becoming a model of devotion and discipline. Still, she remained innocent in many ways. As a child, she had been astonished to discover that her governess was paid to care for her. When the woman told her, "You've seen me receive my money every month," Tatiana replied with sweet surprise, "I always thought that was a gift for you." Then came the Russian Revolution of 1917. The imperial family was arrested, and at first confined in Tsarskoye Selo. Later, they were transferred to guarded residences in Tobolsk, and finally to Yekaterinburg, deep in Siberia. The drastic change in their circumstances, the loss of freedom, the uncertainty, the fear, weighed heavily on Tatiana, just as it did on the rest of her family. She felt lost, adrift, and without purpose. Tatiana tried to intercede on behalf of her mother. On May 8, 1917, she wrote to a nurse friend asking why her colleagues no communicated directly with Empress Alexandra. The friend later noted in her diary that though she pitied the imperial family, she could not bring herself to write to the empress, for in her eyes, Alexandra was to blame for the revolution. In those same letters, Tatiana expressed concern for her fellow nurses, and for one particular patient they had once cared for together. In April of 1918, the Bolsheviks transferred Tsar Nicholas, Empress Alexandra, and Maria to Yekaterinburg. The rest of the family remained behind in Tobolsk, as the Tsarevich Alexei had suffered another attack of hemophilia and was too weak to travel. It was Tatiana who convinced her mother to stop torturing herself and to make the painful decision to go with her husband, leaving Alexei behind. During the month they were separated from their parents and sister, Tatiana, Olga, and Anastasia, together with their attendants, spent their days sewing precious stones and jewels into the linings of their dresses, hoping to keep them hidden from their captors. Alexandra later wrote that upon arriving in Yekaterinburg, she, Nicholas, and Maria had been harshly searched, and many of their belongings confiscated. The hiding places proved effective. The Bolsheviks would not discover the jewels sewn into the clothing until after the executions. Pierre Gilliard, the family's devoted French tutor, who accompanied them as far as Tobolsk, but was forbidden to go on to Yekaterinburg, later recalled the last time he saw them. The sailor Nagorny, who cared for Alexei, passed beneath my window, carrying the sick boy in his arms. Behind them came the Grand Duchesses, holding small suitcases and personal items. I tried to step outside, but a guard shoved me back into my room. I returned to the window. Tatiana was the last to pass, carrying her little dog, struggling to drag a heavy brown suitcase. It was raining, and I saw her feet sink into the mud with every step. Nagorny tried to help her, but one of the commissars roughly pushed him away. In Yekaterinburg, Tatiana would sometimes meet with her younger sisters to share tea and brief conversations with a few of the guards. They asked about their families and spoke with quiet hope about one day beginning a new life in England, when their long-awaited freedom finally came. But one afternoon, a guard grew too familiar and told an obscene joke in front of the Grand Duchesses. Horrified, Tatiana fled the room, while her younger sister Maria firmly rebuked the guards for their improper behavior. Soon after, when a new commander took charge of the Ipatiev house, the family was completely cut off from the guards, and the rules of their confinement became even stricter. Still, Tatiana remained the natural leader of the group. Her parents often sent her to speak with the guards, to ask about their conditions, or to learn what would happen to them next. She spent long hours by her mother's side, and with her ailing brother, reading to them to ease their minds or playing with Alexei to soothe his pain. By the end of June 1918, Tatiana used her nursing skills to give Dr. Yevgeny Botkin a morphine injection to relieve his severe kidney pain. On July 14, 1918, local priests in Yekaterinburg held a private religious service for the family. The next morning, the sisters woke in unusually good spirits. On the afternoon of July 16th, the last full day of her life, Tatiana sat beside her mother, and together they read the Bible. As Alexandra later noted in her diary, mother and daughter simply talked after that, quietly, tenderly. During dinner that evening, Yakov Yurovsky, the head of the guard detachment, entered the room and announced that the young kitchen boy, Alexei's playmate, had to gather his things and go to a relative who needed him. In truth, the boy was sent to a hotel across the street. The guards did not want to kill him along with the Romanovs. That very night, in the early hours of July 17, 1918, the family was awakened and told they needed to go down to the basement, as there were disturbances in the city. For their own safety, they carried pillows, handbags, and small items, anything that might make the descent easier for Alexandra and the fragile Alexei. The Empress, having asked for chairs for herself and her son, sat to his left. They waited there for nearly half an hour, unaware of what was to come, as final preparations were made. Then Yurovsky entered. He ordered them to stand and read the sentence of execution. The first volley killed only the Tsar, the Empress, and 2 male servants, wounding Grand Duchess Maria, Dr. Botkin, and the Empress's maid. The shooters were forced to leave the room, choking on the thick smoke and toxic gases from their own weapons. After a few minutes, when the haze had cleared, they returned. Dr. Botkin was shot dead. They fired repeatedly at the Tsarevich Alexei, but the bullets could not pierce the jewels sewn into his clothing. They tried stabbing him with bayonets, without success. Finally, Yurovsky stepped forward and shot him twice in the head. Then they turned to Olga and Tatiana, who were huddled against the wall, clinging to each other and crying out for their mother. The soldiers lunged with their 20-centimeter bayonets, but once again, the hidden jewels beneath their dresses blunted the blows. According to Yurovsky's account, the sisters tried to stand, but Tatiana was killed instantly by a bullet to the back of her head. A moment later, Olga fell too, mortally wounded. For decades, conspiracy theorists claimed that one or more members of the Romanov family had somehow survived the massacre. These rumors persisted even after the remains of most of the family were discovered and identified in a mass grave, unearthed in a forest outside Yekaterinburg in 1991. But 2 bodies were still missing, those of the Tsarevich Alexei and one of the 4 Grand Duchesses. As time went on, new theories began to emerge. In his 1995 book, The Romanov Conspiracies, The Romanovs and the House of Windsor, author Michael Oakley-Shaw claimed that Tatiana might have been rescued and taken to England, where he suggested she had married a British officer and lived under the name Larissa Tudor. His claim was based on the diaries of British agent Richard Maynitz Hagen, who hinted that one of the Grand Duchesses, supposedly Tatiana, had been successfully freed. However, historians dismissed the story, insisting that all the Romanovs, including Tatiana, were killed in Yekaterinburg. Then, on August 23, 2007, a Russian archaeologist announced the discovery of 2 partially burned skeletons in a location that matched the description found in Yurovsky's reports. Experts determined that the remains belonged to a boy between 12 and 15 years old and a young woman between 15 and 19. On April 30, 2008, Russian forensic scientists confirmed that DNA tests proved the remains were those of the Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters. With that discovery, the Tsar's family was finally complete. Tatiana Nikolaevna Romanov was 21 years old when she was executed alongside her family.